In this video, I'll first set the stage for the initial states of China, and we'll then explore the first state or states of China, those being arguably the Erlitou culture, and then definitely the following Shan. The complexity and often corresponding power of states sits atop a state's agricultural production, and China's transition period from hunter-gatherer to agricultural lifeways was preceded by the adoption of sedentary lifestyles by some, and the agricultural transition itself may have taken place by as early as 9,500 years ago. By 8,500 years ago, agriculture had most certainly been picked up, and now the adoption and improvement of agricultural production afforded a great rise in population across time, and eventually the emergence of elites, and soon enough we have our first area with a central region dominating the power and cultural scene of their extended surroundings, the Erlitou. With the Erlitou, arguably a state has emerged, and once again in the long story of our history, as with hydrogen and helium making stars, elements forming molecules and minerals, the specific molecules and minerals forming the earliest life, and so on, this time perhaps a smaller historical/developmental threshold is crossed as the combined collections of more densely populated areas of human beings see new forms of social organization and energy control, and an entity never seen in this area of the planet before, and very similar to their counterparts spawned across the reaches of the globe, arose. But that's for the first state. First were the agricultural communities, appearing by at least 8,500 years ago, or 6,500 BC. Our focus will be limited to the north, where the first states arose. The 9,000 to 7,000 year ago Peiligand culture shows small sites, usually 1 to 2 hectares in size, with some sites far more focused on stone tool production. The largest settlement was 6 hectares. From 7,000 to 6,000 years ago, the early Yangshao culture show an increased diversity of home shapes and sizes. Their round homes came in small and medium sizes, and their square in small, medium, and large. The large home, however, doesn't seem to have been for a person or family to stay. It doesn't appear to have been residential. They were reserved for one per cluster of homes, have no domestic features, and leave behind no cooking vessels in the archaeological record. As for the question of developments in social hierarchy, while we do have slight differences in size between the small and medium houses, we still don't have much disparity in either home size or tomb remains. After 6,000 years ago, we start finding significantly larger buildings and settlements, but tombs remain relatively equal. Before the Yangshao edged to a close around 5,000 years ago, we see the emergence of some walled settlements, perhaps, as has been the case many times ever since the Shelly development of the late Cambrian Ediacaran, reflecting an adaptation to the enlarged aspect of violence in the environment. The Longshan Cultures story is the next leg on our journey, starting around 3000 BC. Across time, the Longshan saw the growth and popularity of fortifying your settlement, and such settlements were often accompanied by larger residences for some, as well as palatial compounds. Social stratification increased in some towns as well, with grave goods showing clearer and more decisive demonstrations of differences in power. Objects such as jade pendants and pig mandibles, both status symbols, or wooden artifacts as well as other special goods, are found buried in a small percentage of graves. Settlements grow larger on average, with the exceptional standout examples of a couple of monstrous larger than 200 hectare settlements, and the houses in some of these growing settlements show very different living situations for those on opposing ends of the economic ladder. Numerous large settlements exist relatively nearby to each other, and bronze and copper artifacts come on board, having earlier arisen in a distinct nearby culture and spread into the Longshan. By 1900 BC, their story is largely over, and we turn our sight to the nascent Erlitou culture. After the Erlitou site is occupied around 3,900 years ago, the population quickly rose in number, likely amounting to more than 20,000 residents of the Erlitou urban center in the 17th century BC. This site rose up and changed the previously known landscape of settlement distribution, came with elite graves, a palatial complex, and a mass uptick in bronze production. Bronze evolved from merely being used for small personal objects and small tools into a state project producing larger ritual vessels right near the palace, and these bronze objects are now associated with power and wealth, the elite. They changed the standard of settlement distribution in that the region of the Erlitou culture sees only one major urban center, whose culture and power dominates the significantly smaller settlements of the surrounding landscape. And they also set up outposts in areas with important raw goods, especially to aid in the acquisition of the raw materials needed in their bronze production industry. The Erlitou might have been a unified state whose ruling dynasty is known, though this remains debated. Traditional Chinese history has it that the coming Shang Dynasty initially arose to topple a multi-hundred-year preceding dynasty called the Xia, who are said to have been founded by the great Yu, who in the role of minister to the then ruler had works built to stem floods, and afterwards the ruler passed over the rule to Yu. Whether and to what extent the story of the founding of the Xia reflects reality, and the same for the broader question of the story of the Xia being that of the Erlitou, remains frustratingly ambiguous, in part because we don't yet have writing in the archaeological record to consult. Lack of writing serves to frustrate much of the record of the Shan as well, who we turn to now. The exact dates of the Shan rise depends to a large extent on whether you place the Shan as defeating and immediately succeeding the Erlitou. While the Erlitou culture was still strong and looming in their region, in northern Henan and southern Hebei resided the not dominated by a single urban center Jiachuan culture, and many think the Jiachuan are part of the story of the origin of the Shan through the early Shan, or perhaps proto-Shan, Erligang culture. Whether this was an early center of Shan power or not, later on we know Anyan to be their capital. Around 1200 BC, the already long-reigning Shan explicitly announced their presence to us in the form of a mature writing system, which surprisingly leaves little sign of earlier development and appears to us conveying full sentences and consisting of around 4,500 different characters. The overwhelming majority of this writing comes to us in the form of oracle bones, or ox shoulder bones and turtle shells on which questions have been inscribed, laying out questions by the king for the ancestors to present to the high god Di, whose response might have been relayed through the cracks on the bone or shell, which came about after they inserted a red-hot bronze rod. To take one example of part of an inscription on a bone, we have, quote, "Should we perhaps pray to the 13 ancestral tablets starting from Shanja by offering cow, and to the ancestral tablets of the sideline of descent by offering sheep? Beyond animals, they would also sacrifice humans at times of famine to assuage the supreme god and bring about deliverance." Interestingly, the writing from this period incorporates the symbols for yin and yang, the earliest lasting appearance of these symbols in history. But for the time being, these symbols are not used in particular connection to each other, and certainly not combined into one term. Instead, they are the terms for sunlight during the day, yang, and the lack of sunlight at night, indicated by yin. Despite the late into Shan rule date of the earliest writing, after all our first inscriptions come from the reign of King Wu Ding, who reigned from about 1250 to 1197, and perhaps a little longer, the concern of these Shan kings with their ancestor worship means that at least we have a Shang Dynasty era record for the earlier Shan kings, and they largely match with the traditional Chinese histories. The Shan were much more powerful than the preceding Erlitou, and some argue that only the Shan count as China's first agrarian civilization, not the Erlitou. Wherever you draw that line, it's definitely the case that the Shan are more powerful, controlling more territory, and building bigger and nicer things, especially of bronze. Bronze production shot up, and larger objects than ever before were made. Their largest bronze object comes from Anyan and gets the gold medal for heaviest yet discovered bronzeware of the ancient world. The Shan stepped up their tomb game, and beyond up to thousands of valuable artifacts, kings would have family, retainers, and others buried along with them, having been killed or killed themselves for this purpose. Sacrificed animals are also featured in these tombs. Shan power was also reflected in the scale of warfare continuing to rise, at times going to war with competing clans and vassals turned to enemies. Around the same time that writing shows up, 1200 BC, warfare gets a boost with the Shan military seeing the introduction of horse-drawn chariots. Soon after 1050 BC, a clan of the west by the Wei River, the Zhou tribe, invaded, defeated, and ended the Shang Dynasty, and established the next great dynasty of China's history.